Good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of the Solo Siren Symposium 2022. I am only sad that I can't be there in person, but I am really excited to share with you some thoughts that I had on the 2021 production of Cessair. The poster advertising Cessair depicts a woman in a bright red shirt standing on the beach with her back to the camera facing the ocean. She is posed with her left hand raised over her head as if in a gesture to call out across the sea with the words, "It's one woman's story and every woman's story," written beneath the production's title. It is the combined elements of the research conducted through performance from the female perspective and lived experience, and then adapting that research to be presented in a live staged event that makes the production of Cessair a form of feminist performed ethnography. Opening in June 2021, Cessair marked a long-awaited return to in-person performance in Tallaght and the larger Dublin area. I'll begin by introducing the concept of feminist performed ethnography and then touching upon the Soul Sirens Collective's methodological approach to creating Cessair, as well as an overview of the production. This will be followed by an analysis of the production through the lens of feminist performed ethnography. Feminist performed ethnography, as presented in this paper, is a combination of the concepts of performed ethnography and feminist ethnography. In choosing to characterize Cessair as performed ethnography, this paper aligns with D. Soyini Madison's delineation between performance ethnography, which is part of the methodological approach of the ensemble, and performed ethnography. Madison asserted, when performances in the field or performance ethnography is adapted for the stage or communicated through modes of performance, it becomes performed ethnography. Another key element of performed ethnography is that it invites the audience to travel empathically to other worlds and to feel some of what others feel and know. Adapting the collected research into a staged production links in well with feminist ethnography, which embraces both traditional and experimental methods for data collection, as well as sharing the findings for the inquiry at hand. In their book, Feminist Ethnography, Krista Craven and Dana Ann Davis posit that feminist ethnography involves a project committed to documenting lived experience as it is impacted by gender, race, class, sexuality, and other aspects of participants' lives. And they make sure to note that it involves a feminist sensibility and commitment to paying attention to marginality and power differentials. Talisa Feliciano, quoted in Feminist Ethnography, shares that it allows me to center art, literature, expression, and people's own accounts of themselves rather than hegemonic accounts of people made by others. The approach of the Solo Sirens Ensemble in the creation of their production of Cessair resonates strongly with Feliciano's account of her own work. For the purposes of this paper, feminist performed ethnography will be framed as a project that is guided by a feminist sensibility, that produces knowledge about people and situations in specific contexts with attention to power differentials, that is communicated with an audience through a staged performance that invites the audience into that world to experience and feel some of what the characters depicted feel and experience. I'm now going to turn to the collective's process in creating Cessair. The myth of Cessair was used as the springboard for exploration of female experience, leading the ensemble to consider ideas around women in leadership, migration, and grief, among others. To do this, director Ginny MacDonald leaned into a range of approaches used within applied theater practices, including storytelling, embodied image theater approaches, visual works, both found pictures and original artworks, dialogue, reflection, writing, music, song, and improvisation. Throughout the devising process, the collective interpreted and reinterpreted the myth of Cessair. For example, MacDonald had the ensemble draw a picture of how they imagined Cessair to be, and using these drawings, they were asked if they knew a woman who is Cessair, and then given an opportunity to share a story about that woman. It was during this exercise that the African goddess Nahanda was first introduced. Further, the ensemble was encouraged to improvise as characters in the story through extemporized gesture sequences, such as an exercise in which the ensemble was to imagine they were on a ship over the course of a 24-hour period, and they were tasked with finding the movements that they might go through in that time while turning their bodies 360 degrees throughout. Activities like hot seating were used as well, giving each ensemble member the opportunity to embody Cessair. Making use of the necessity of Zoom throughout the process, the collective invited guests to take part. From March through May of 2021, 16 workshops were held with both the Solar Sounds Collective and guest story sharers. In our conversations, MacDonald recalled a specific moment in the story that the collective had been struggling with: the idea that Cessair's end would be to die of a broken heart. It wasn't quite sitting well with them, and they continued to interrogate the issue. One of the story sharers suggested that perhaps Cessair's heart had expanded so much that it wasn't broken, but rather she died of an exploded heart. This offering was ultimately tied in with another story sharer's contribution around how people leave a piece of their heart everywhere they go, so that wherever they happen to be, their heart is never 100% complete. MacDonald paraphrased the story sharer as saying, "On the one hand, you're always heartbroken, but on the other hand, you're always heart heavy, like your heart is really big." Both of these contributions resonated with what the collective had been hearing from women across Ireland about sites associated with Cessair near each of them. And all of these ideas were incorporated into the production. The approach of the Solar Sounds Collective calls to mind Dwight Conkergood's concept of performance-sensitive ways of knowing, in which performance-centered research takes as both its subject matter and method the experiencing body situated in time, place, and history. This concept is directly related to performance ethnography. During the reflection of the project, one member stated, "The explorative process was huge. It was so broad. It was that you learned so much about other people and yourself." Through the devising process, the ensemble shared stories and invited the sharing of stories by the guests in the workshops. Each story, each response became a new data point for investigation by the collective and impacted the final production. The collective made two major alterations to the myth as it is typically told. The first crucial change was to the ending. Rather than have Cessair die of a broken heart, the collective decided that Cessair's heart had become so expansive that it burst and that the pieces had scattered all across Ireland. The other crucial change was the inclusion of the African goddess Nahanda. In their production, she appears in the moment of greatest despair on the journey as a sister spirit, encouraging Cessair onward. Composed of two distinct movements, the production began outdoors in the Chamber Square and then moved inside the Civic. In the first movement, the myth of Cessair is relayed to the audience by 7 women through simultaneously collaborative and responsive movement, spoken narrative, underscored music, and song. 4 performers moved on the designated stage area, while 2 more who functioned primarily as oral narrators and 1 who provided the rich soundtrack and solo singing were placed just off to the left under a tent. All of the women contributed to the story, each highlighted at certain points, but none overpowering the others. Rather, they were actively receptive and supportive of each other, like well-trained jazz musicians who know the story by heart and riff off one another, making each performance a little different while maintaining the substance and character of the story being told. The first movement concludes as Nahanda drifts away from Cessair and a song begins, prompting the performers to slowly begin making their way inside. Around the walls of the inside space, there were 10 seats arranged facing inward. Each was in front of a large speaker and positioned below a banner containing a phrase that harked back to key moments of the myth recounted in the first movement. Audience members were invited to explore the stations, staying at one the whole time or moving as they felt compelled for the remainder of the performance time. The collective concentrated on better understanding the female experience through their investigation of the myth of Cessair, as well as the collection of stories from female identifying peoples from around the world. In the group reflection, Jen Webster, a collective member and producer, divulged, "I didn't think I had this great female story that many of you had. I really didn't know where to go with it. And through the process, it shocked me to no end. Like, I shared a story about my daughter when I didn't intend to do that. My friend gave a story about me, which I never expected." Webster's description details the emphasis on viewing the world and the experiences through the lived female experience. The description also links in with Jennifer Coates's observation that mutual or reciprocal self-disclosure is very common among women when sharing stories. The production's feminist underpinnings are heavily showcased in the first movement of the piece when the performers are responding to one another in the moment. This style of collaborative, improvised performance displays a quality that Coates describes in her book, Women Talk, regarding how women engage in dialogue. The construction of talk is a joint effort. The group takes priority over the individual, and the women's voices combine or meld to construct a shared text. This quality was not only evidenced in the final performed production, but was also evident in the collaborative working style of the collective witnessed in rehearsals leading up to the opening, as well as the audio recording of the debrief and reflection on the project. By deciding to share the ethnographic research and experiences collected and analyzed through the process with a performance crafted and devised for an audience, the Solo Sirens Collective contributed new knowledge and a new experience to their local Tala community through this performed ethnography, further linking in with Madison's ideas around performed ethnography and drawing the audience into the performance. And her director's note, MacDonald expressed, "As solo sirens, we have worked together to help each of us bring more of who we are to the world. We hope the same can be true for our audiences. We want you to be part of the process." With Cessair, involvement of the audience was deeply encompassing. Cessair was an event that required the audience to perform the act of relocation along with the performers, and then encouraged audiences to independently explore the space to which they had traveled. In the first movement, the collective invited the audience into the performance through song and transported them into a mythological world that was fused with the here and the now. At the end of the first movement, the ticketed audience was then invited to literally travel with the ensemble to the land we found. In this new space, a circle inclusive of audience and performers was formed in an act that signaled deeper communion and a shared embodied experience among all present. The second movement was a fully immersive event that allowed the audience to explore and immerse themselves in the various stories that began playing from the 10 stations, as well as the projected video footage of the beachside workshop and the movements of the ensemble members in the center of the floor. The audience was free to make decisions about what type of stories they were drawn to and where they wanted to be in the moment and where they wanted their focus to be. The story that was told through the Solo Sirens Collective's production of Cessair had become part of every member of the ensemble, and this aspect was palpable to the audience. During their reflection, Nicola Whalen shared, "I didn't memorize that piece by lines because I just knew it, and that was new because I wasn't acting as a character. I was acting as myself, a woman who was telling the story that we all have and the commonalities across throughout us all and each part of the stories and how that connects us, and it was me." The other members, through their vocal affirmations while Whalen was speaking, indicated that this was also true for them. The collective affirmed this when they contributed, "It is the self, but a heightened self, a poetic self, enlightened as well. It's an enlightened self, the self who can see the self." This quote is constructed through crosstalk by multiple speakers. It's difficult to make out how many in the audio of the collective in the reflection, each affirming and adding on to the sentiment. The Solo Sirens Collective production of Cessair stands as testimony to the lived experience of women from around the world. Feminist ethnographer Diane Bell wrote, "Ethnography at its best opens a discursive space in which the silence may speak. It empowers and validates everyday experience. It brings to the threshold of consciousness the routines, rhythms, and rituals of everyday life, allows us to savor the ordinary, map the mundane, identify salient symbols, and to seek the strategies of persistence and resistance." Each performance of Cessair opened up a space of potentiality that was unique for each audience member, holding space for the epic and the mythic alongside the everyday experiences of 100 women. Cessair welcomed audience members of all genders and challenged each to consider the female story, complicated and multidimensional. Resisting any one trope, the Solo Sirens Collective production of Cessair advanced female agency and, with care, defiantly affirmed the significance of female stories and the female experience. Thank you very much.